We're back. Episode 2.
Let's go.
This is take 5 of the City on the Hill podcast. My name is George Coletrain.
I'm Marcus Donalson.
I'm Steven Beyer.
And we're excited to be back with you guys talking about creatives in the workspace, especially with churches. We're here to equip, inspire, and encourage people to live out their God-given calling in their creative spaces. And so we're excited. This is episode 2. If you did miss episode 1, go back and check it out. Kind of introducing who we are and what this podcast is going to be about. But this first topic is one that I think we're really excited to talk about.
Yeah.
I think we all have different experience in and around it. But really just circling around the idea of why so many creatives are leaving the church, especially from a working space, but even just leaving the church in general. What have our experiences been with that?
Yeah.
And maybe some ways we believe it can change in the future.
Yeah.
So, if you're into the City on the Hill podcast, you're into creating the church, the local church, working for a church, leadership, all that different stuff, give us a like, subscribe, do all that stuff below. Jump in the comments. But let's jump right into it. Mm-hmm. Steve.
Okay.
Just to keep it fresh.
Yes, sir.
On your toes.
Yeah.
Man, I'm curious. You've been around church, a lot of different types, from small churches, mega churches, not a church plant, but like a revitalization of a church. Mm-hmm. You oversee people. Mm-hmm. You oversee creatives. I'm curious what your experience has been. Would you say 10 years of vocational church work?
Oh no, it's much longer.
Longer.
Oh yeah.
I guess yeah.
This is about to get scary. We're going on 17.
Okay, 17.
Let's go, bro.
years
Yeah.
of vocational working.
Yeah.
Some with creatives. What is all those years at creatives?
Yeah. So either creative worship.
Creative or worship.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just curious, as you looked maybe even outwardly or inwardly at your experiences, what have you seen around? What's your thought process around creatives and leaving the church space, and what your experience?
Totally. I think it's a multifaceted issue. Funny enough, where my brain went is they're not necessarily leaving in some places they were never invited to begin with. So we talked about this a little bit early on of like the catching up with culture and the different roadblocks that the last several years have thrown our way in church. And for a lot of places, this isn't even a discussion. Like they're not even thinking this way.
Yeah.
And so you might have creatives within your congregation, but they're not involved in active ministry. So that's problem number one is they're not even asked to participate.
Yeah, totally.
So if you're going then, all right, next step, so you're at a place where, yes, the creatives are involved, I would say probably the next most common problem is it's not resourced. Mm-hmm. Whether that be financially or whether that be from a time and equity share standpoint within other ministries, how much the pastor is willing to devote and give freedom or authority in other aspects. So that's just a huge issue. But then I would say probably the third most prominent is we got to, as creatives, take a little bit of ownership is we've got a heart problem.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people leave because something didn't go the way they were hoping, and it probably had more to do with their own heart and perspective than there was a problem with the church itself.
That's good.
Yeah, so those would be probably the most prevalent. There's a bunch of things in between, and I've seen it all. I mean, at the church I'm at, we're going through James right now, so the heart is just constantly coming up, and just constantly being reminded how selfish and wicked I am, and just we are as people. And so I just know in the creative, which deals so much of an overflow from the heart.
Yeah, man.
Worship dealing so much of an overflow from the heart.
Yeah.
Like this is just a really, really, really prevalent issue.
Yeah.
And it's a very sensitive issue. When we're creating these art pieces, it's like we're putting a piece of ourselves in there. So a lot of times these things get heated and we make emotional decisions, not rational ones. And so, I've been there myself. I've seen it happen. And yeah, both sides definitely can be responsible at various times. I don't know if we're wanting to get specifically into
I think that's a good starting point.
Yeah.
Like, and I think we'll dive in specifically as we go. Marcus, I'm curious from your perspective. Yeah, worship. Again, definitely within the creative sphere, and you're creating from the heart, or you're performing from a place where you're trying to create atmospheres, and different things like that. You also oversee people. You have been in this space for quite a while now. What has been your perspective as you've seen creatives come and go, or just even people that you maybe looked up to when you first came into the biz?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me, I mean, Steve nailed most of the things I would have said too, but I think one thing I've really felt heavily is for it to be a creative space, there has to be creativity. And I think the church has thrived off of like recreating the same thing over and over and over again.
for a long time now.
Oh my gosh, yeah, like worship music in and of itself, like as a musician, I'm not saying I do this, I'm not going to out myself, but the way that I can prepare for a CCM set, which if you don't know what that is, like contemporary Christian music, it all kind of sounds the same. As long as you know about 5 chords and you know how to get in between the different keys, you will know a song within the first 20 seconds of hearing it.
And that's what a capo's for.
Right. Listen, or the transpose button.
Yeah, 100%.
I don't use that. There's a lot of people who would fry me in the comments for using the transpose button. But I think sometimes creatives can feel like, man, I don't have a place here because there's not a safe place for me to actually create. And you kind of touched on it, letting there be a permission to not only create, but I was at a conference last month with Martin Smith, and he was talking about pastors and leaders giving their creatives a space to fail and not actually nail it every single time.
That's good.
And I think we've gotten into, which gets into the heart issue, we've gotten way more into a performance mindset instead of actually learning to, one, like pursue the presence of God first and please his heart. But it's become more about like how well can I sing or how awesome can I play my instrument instead of learning and growing in time with him and then allowing, like you said, the outpouring of the heart to show on a Sunday morning. So
That's so interesting, like your distinction between the difference between performing and creating.
yeah, man.
Like that.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that. Like, how do you, why and how do you see those playing out differently?
Yeah, I think performing has a lot more to do with pleasing the people in front of you. And when we are creating, we're created in the image of God. So we're created by a creator. So it's almost innate in us to want to create and to make new things and to see them as good, just as he did. But I think a lot of times we get into the comfortability of, man, I could just do this over and over again and get a pat on the back from the people sitting in the seats or from my lead pastor because, they liked the way that this set made them feel in that moment. And sometimes God is actually calling us to do something different. The Bible talks a lot about the Lord doing a new thing.
Sure,
like
sing
new
to the Lord a
wineskin.
new song.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And so I think a lot of times we can get caught up in the monotony of ministry, especially if you're wearing multiple hats. You're like, the less I can think about, the easier this is going to be for me. And so I think getting out of a performance mindset is really allowing yourself to not be worried about what people are going to think. That doesn't mean we dismiss the needs of the people that are walking in the doors of the church, but we are first pleasing the heart of the Father and knowing that when we do that, he says, if my name be exalted, I will draw men unto me.
Yeah.
And so first doing that, which will allow you to not feel like I got to prove myself to anybody in here.
Yeah.
I just need to make sure I'm doing what I'm called to do. And that will take you out of a mindset of performance and allow you to be creative in pursuing God and his heart. And
Yeah,
so-
and I hear performing can be risk adverse of like you're afraid to fail.
Right.
It's about showing a certain side of yourself. It's probably a lot of a pride issue of like I just don't want to look a certain way. It's funny. I'm blessed in my context of like I have a pastor who doesn't have that problem. I mean, I've heard him say over and over again, if it isn't broke, change it.
That's great.
Which is a scary context to me, but also very freeing of empowering of no, I want you to try things, and we're called to try things.
Yeah.
And obviously there can be an extreme of you're constantly creating
No
chaos.
continuity.
And they're if nobody's ever experiencing any amount of safety, then you're probably going too far.
Right.
But I do like that mindset of pushing of don't just get comfortable in that rhythm. Constantly be pursuing doing the best you possibly can.
Yeah, I think I was taught at a young age, God deserves our best, right? He gave us his best in the sacrifice that he made for us. And so in our creative spaces, it's important that we give him our best iterations, and that's going to grow over time.
Totally.
As you grow in skill, as you grow in relationship with the Lord.
Excellence looks different in different seasons.
Absolutely.
So you're a church of 200, your excellence level is going to look different than a church of 10,000, but you're still called to give excellence.
Yeah.
And then being humble enough to go, my excellence is going to look different than someone else.
And that speaks to performance too, because if you're starting to compare yourself to X church over here and why are we not doing this? Then you're again seeking the wrong things, right? My approval then comes from when I finally hit that mark of, we finally did what they were doing, instead of what God has actually called you to do. There's an anointing on each of us as individuals that he's calling us to do, and then on the house itself. And so, man, that performance mindset is something that we are doing our best to root out of people that are in our ministry, because we want them to come with a heart to please the Father first. And
that's good.
Yeah, makes it a lot easier.
I'm so passionate about this issue. I get I get to consult and do different things, or people ask me, and I love talking about this issue often. I think generally from a leadership position, it comes down to 3 major buckets. And we won't have to go deep in all of them, but I just think it usually comes down to a lack of pastoring creatives, a lack of managing creatives. And then it's funny how hearing you guys say it, you guys are saying it differently, but in a lot of ways it's kind of the same thing. It's are you creating a space for them to be creative? And it's funny, I've never thought of performing as not an antithesis to creating, but it's not an environment for creating. I've never thought of that before, so it's really an interesting insight. But a lot of times I tell people, and pastors will almost get mad when I say this, but I'm like, your Sunday services are almost assuredly not a space for them to create.
No.
We create our services to execute. Yeah. We do. And I know we like to use language and say things like, no. But it's honestly, it's hey, most creatives or your production and worship, whatever, they're trying to have their Sundays go as smooth as possible, and they're creating it to be safe or to be
accessible.
For people. Because
which is
good.
Yeah.
Right? No, it is. But you also then have to realize that that's not a creative space. And so if that's the majority of the work that they're doing is, maybe they're doing that for a Sunday service, or maybe, a couple of midweeks, or a youth, or whatever, they're all kind of the same thing. It's there needs to be a space within their kind of normal work week or their normal workflow, whatever, where they're able to create, which is they're innovating, they're trying to come up with something from scratch, which has the ability to fail, not do well, and that's encouraged and okay to do so. And almost as surely that's not a Sunday space. That's not you know what I mean? That's not a service. And so many of our churches are centered around services, which again I think is good. That's not a critique, but it's just a reality of, okay, well, if that's a majority of what they're doing, and they have maybe some some other kind of auxiliary type ministry functions that they're overseeing, they're probably not in a creative space. And so that's why a lot of creatives, again, whether it's in a music space or kind of a more video design photographers, they have outlets because they need to be creative. You can get really good at, I know this is again almost blasphemous to say, but you can get really good at putting together a worship service without having to be creative at all.
Or not worshiping.
Yeah. And so if you're really good at putting together, your video angles, what's the set, what graphics need to go up on the screen, and it becomes a formula. Yeah. Creatives are well, actually, I need an outlet. So you'll see them maybe they're doing wedding videos, or they're doing freelance work, or they're playing for other band. They're starting a band and doing other, playing for other musical sets, whatever. They're doing that because they're like, I need something new and fresh where I can try and create, or I can try and do something new. And so most churches right now are not set up for creative spaces. So I think it's generally, they're not being pastored well. They're not being managed well. The people who are managing them don't really understand a creative just environment and what they need for that, and or their work generally isn't creative work. Yeah, they get into it wanting to create new things, and then they end up having to
be a part of the machine.
Be part of the machine.
Yeah,
and again, I don't mean that as a critique of downplaying the church.
Not at all.
But if that's what your majority of your church is doing, know that your creatives are probably in their space, withering away, going, "Oh, I wish I could create more." Not like, I think we've used the word creative. We've made the word creative be like a big umbrella word. And it's like, you can be making content or making, putting together worship and singing and not be creative, not be artistic. Yeah. Like, you're just making the graphic, taking the photo, making the video, right? Putting together a worship song, singing the set, and you haven't been creative one time in 3 months. Yeah. And people don't always know that.
I think you kind of talked about it earlier, and I want to speak a little bit to any pastors who might be listening right now. I don't think Sunday is the space to be creative. I think there's time for that during the week. But for us at our church, Sunday is for people who are usually brand new to church.
Totally.
There's a lot of people who have no idea what's going on when they walk in, or they've heard something. And our whole heart is to like debunk the myth of the church and show them that it is a place that they belong in. So I don't think it's like I don't want to come off as saying like, oh, you need to create an open season for creativity on Sunday. I think there are like little pockets of it that can happen on a Sunday morning. And I think that's kind of more what we're speaking to in terms of creating space for that in that area.
Yeah, and creativity goes a lot in the prep.
Oh yeah,
as well, and I think that can get lost sometimes. I think when we use this word, it almost can be it becomes too big. Yes. Like everything creative has to be this massive change. It's like no, like it can be like simple little things that are changing things up, taking it to the next level. So I think that can be a word that can get lost in translation sometimes.
For us on Sundays, from a worship perspective, I think like I music direct a lot at my church, and I think our form of creativity on a Sunday comes from how we take the songs that we are given and put our own spin on them throughout the week and even in the moment. So like sometimes we're really and this goes even into discipling creatives, one, teaching your worship leaders and your musicians how to read a room and know that some things don't actually fit just because it sounds cool. Yeah. But also music is such a beautiful tool that the Lord has created that when you hit a certain note, it makes people feel something. And how can you align that with what God is trying to do in the room? That's good. And so when I'm subbing a chord for what's supposed to be there, is it intentional? Right. And am I doing it in such a way that like illuminates what God is doing in the room?
That's good.
I want to build on something you're saying there. Yeah. Because you're talking about teaching principles. And I think where creatives can get hung up is they skip the developing skill set part. So they go straight into the, like, I just want to create this exciting new experience, whatever it is that they're working on. And forgetting to lay the foundation of you are able to do that through the skills that you acquire and sharpen, and that will give you the freedom to then take that and mold it into something beautiful. Yeah. But without that initial work, there's a good reason probably in a lot of contexts why your pastor isn't letting you do stuff.
Right. Sure. Right.
Like, and that's where we got to just get real for a second. We're not trying to just create for the sake of creation. We're trying to bring glory to God. And if we've talked about this before of like first fruits, putting your best forth. Yes, that is not doing that if you are not putting in the time to do the best you possibly can.
Absolutely.
And I love too, like, I think you brought it up, I guess twice now. Like I think there's, again, when we come to conversation, there's things that we can put on the feet of both sides. And we're talking about, again, from a leadership perspective, but also from a creative standpoint, like what are ways that we need to again be accountable and even hold ourselves as a community, creatives accountable in this space. So I mean, you talked about your skill sets and again your kind of your heart that you're bringing
Totally
to the table as a creative, right? What are other ways that you would say, even too, from a creative standpoint, from a accountability standpoint, of ways that we maybe in the church have maybe just gotten a little wayward, and we need to do better, not just blame leadership for all the issues.
My pastor and I talk a lot about what are we trying to accomplish, and if he were sitting in the room right now, he'd probably be laughing because we argue about like, well, why can't we do this?
Sure.
And I think a lot of times, like, as creatives, we have to learn to swallow our pride and recognize, like, it's not about you.
Totally.
Right? So whatever capacity you're in, worship specifically for me it's not about me.
Totally.
I might be picking the songs, I might be putting the team together, but that's not my opportunity to be like, here's what I can do.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times we get caught up in like, this is what I feel like I need to be doing. And again, everything goes back to the heart.
For sure.
Why are you doing this?
That's right.
This is to bring glory to the name of Jesus, first and foremost. And then there are people who are walking in those doors who need the hope and healing of Jesus Christ. And so first and foremost, we have to be accomplishing those things. And I think having a relationship with your pastor or whoever your leaders may be, if you're further down in the organization, like having a relationship with your worship pastor, if you're a music director or a musician, and recognizing the more conversations you have and you understand each other's hearts, the easier it is to have conversations about being creative.
That's right.
Totally.
You're not like coming from a place of not knowing each other and being like, well, this is what I want to do, and you might be on the complete opposite end of the spectrum of what's trying to be accomplished.
Right.
And so I think a lot of creatives leave sometimes because they don't recognize lead pastors are kind of giving up from a worship perspective. Again, I know I'm speaking heavily on that, but they're giving up, like, at some churches, 50% of the service that happens to the worship team.
That's good.
And it's an important part of the service, and we're thankful that they do that. But we then begin to think like, oh, like now I'm the guy. It's about what I can do and what I can bring to the table. And it's like, no, we're still submitted to leaders, and you have to know those leaders well to then serve the vision that God has given them.
I think for me that was the big. That's where I wanted to go to. I think so much of it is realizing to creatives is like trust is earned, not given. And I don't know if it's a function of most creatives being a certain age, or you're obviously from a creative, you're probably dealing with a pastor who doesn't know about your world, so then you just kind of have maybe a kind of an attitude about it. But I think so much of it is like we approach some of these conversations or maybe issues that that we're having, and it's like you're like, well, this is what we should do. Like you're almost like, this is what I saw them do this, or whatever the case is, and it's like, hey man, first off, if you're working with any leader, like trust is earned, and that takes time, and that takes history, and like a pattern, right? I'm blessed because I've been able to work with my pastor and someone who's led me for over a decade, and we have immense trust. Yeah. So much so that I make calls all the time without checking in with him because I know I'm like, we're good. And there's areas where I'm like, oh, this is actually an area. No, I do need to really check with him because like I have a thought and process here that I would do this, but I need to verify, right? Because he is as the lead pastor, as leadership, he is stewarding the church that God has given him. And so it's unfair for me to make calls or to undermine him as a leader. And so like the more you build that trust with someone where again, your leader then trusts that you are in alignment and you are, you're kind of on the same wavelength there, then the more kind of freedom he or she will give you. Right. And I think that's really important is that like, I think, again, I don't know if it's just and I can speak to this of being again in leadership at such a young age. There was a season where I just really thought, man, the people above me they had no clue. And if they would just do it this way, you know what I mean? And as I've now grown older, and now I'm in places of more and more leadership, I realize how how wrong I was, first off, and how just, I think the best word you said, it was so selfish of me to think that I understood the best and only, the right way of doing things, and not taking into account all the other things that would have to go into certain decisions, or all the other things that would impact or whatnot. And so I think like building trust with your leader. And then I think part of that is like communicating. So I think part of it is like you have to then communicate, not just I think this is the best way, but communicate like why, or being able to help walk through decision making with your leaders or with the people that it's impacting, and do that with the humility that goes, even if I communicate this a certain way, ultimately it's not my decision. And if they choose to do something that is not what I think it should be done, can I still serve faithfully?
Come on.
With a
100%.
Yeah.
Because if you can't, then what that says, even if quote unquote you're right, what that says is you have a heart issue that you can't be led.
Yes.
And your leader probably senses that and can't trust you with more.
Yeah, I think communication is absolutely massive.
Yeah.
Like I completely agree with you on that. There's something that popped into mind of like, when there's some things that, if not communicated properly from either way, you don't even know why you're missing each other. I go back to that. There was a time we were doing a sermon bumper video, and someone on the team had a suggestion. So they were painting this picture, and it sounded really awesome and cool. But they were like, so it's night, and the night signifies peace and calm and security. And if you're a pastor in the room, you're listening to that, and you're like, that makes no sense whatsoever. Because they're coming at it from the scriptures of like, we're literally going through that, and that's the opposite of what this is saying. Like, Jewish culture would have said that night was terrifying. This is where the uncertainty, the bad things happen. And so being able to communicate and work, and again, as a creative, having a heart of like, I'm willing to learn and come along, of like, ultimately, I'm trying to support the message here.
Yes.
Just because something sounds cool and I can create a certain vibe, aesthetic, that's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to support the overall message.
Absolutely.
And to do that to the best of your ability. That comes up in music all the time, too.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have, how many different musical genres can you choose from? Different ways that you can do songs. Like, there's choices constantly being made, and you have to decide, how am I best supporting what our end goal is here? Yeah.
Great.
And I love the idea of communicating and communicating well. I think that's one thing we as creatives have not done for each other, and like bringing up that next generation is, you have to learn to have conversations with leadership. And executive pastors usually think from a numbers perspective.
Totally.
And so if you don't know how to pitch your idea from like hey, this also makes sense financially for us. This is how this is going to set us up well for the future. Then a lot of times you will miss each other because there's just not mutual understanding in the benefit of what you're trying to push. I remember we were trying to put a studio here, like this had to be like a year or two ago. And the amount of times I felt like I was repeating myself because I wasn't doing a good job of explaining why it was important that we had something like this on campus. Eventually I sat down with a mentor of mine. He was like, bro, it's like, you won't have to go pay for studio time, which you guys are paying a crazy amount of money for. You're able to then, we have a leadership college here. That's a pull for students, which means they're getting to come learn on state-of-the-art equipment and industry standard digital audio workstations. And now we are able to create in-house. And like a big reason for us writing songs is to write the songs of the house. And it's really difficult to write the songs of the house not in the house. So it's being able to have those kinds of conversations with them and help them see your vision without again with a heart of humility, right? You have to have a heart of humility coming to them saying like, hey, I don't know all the answers, but I think this is where we need to go and here's my reasoning for it. If we don't come at things with like pompousness, I think we're received a lot better.
I think we've been talking a lot about kind of some of these issues from a relational standpoint. I'm curious because there's also a component of it that's structural, right?
Yeah.
From a just a managerial, structural, organizational.
Yeah.
Like we're also just seeing, I think creatives leaves for issues that I know of. I can think of a few off the top of my head where they're like, I love my pastor, I love my church, but there's another reason, usually organizational structure, where I just can't stay here as far as my job, right? They're not even bitter. They're just like, I just can't,
Yeah.
right? So there are also those issues. Maybe speak to some of those too. Like, what do we, again, from different leadership roles that you guys have, and what are other barriers or roadblocks that can lead to creatives leaving?
Totally. I mean, we talked about finances early on, and
Yeah.
that's a tough one to talk about.
Sure.
I mean, if we're going over the organizational chart
Yeah.
of what is important, so worship would be towards the top of that list. That one has the benefit of like that's going to be pretty high in that chart. The video person, it's changing, but that's not like you're.
It's a weird world, right?
100%, 100%. And so you're living in this in between of pastors are starting to get like, oh, this is really important, but we've never done it this way, and so we're not even financially structured in a way to support this.
Yes.
So it's really addressing, okay, what is the ultimate goal here? What are we trying to accomplish? And so what can we do with what we have now? What can we do to try and build upon where we want to go? We got to start thinking about those things.
Yeah.
And just being realistic of like, if you have a volunteer, you have to understand that you're going to get volunteer level.
Yes.
But also from the other
There's
side,
so many so many layers
Yeah,
of this
bro.
conversation.
for sure.
Because also one thing that kind of like, oh man, like we talk about the money thing, but then also I think what's happened, you and I have talked about this.
Yeah.
There's been such an emphasis in churches recently about then as a lead, like being a leader to almost lead volunteers, and I'm like, that's cool. That's not a creative job. So now what you're looking for is a creative who's like a leader,
totally.
and those are like.
It exists, but it's a specific
It's a
type
very
of person.
specific
And those
Yeah.
guys have jobs.
Yeah.
Those guys have
And
jobs.
generally, most creative people get into the world because they want to create, not because they
Yeah.
want to lead people.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're like, I want to learn camera skills, or I want to learn this instrument, or I want to learn, I'm Illustrator, Photoshop. And then you're like, but I need to lead 5 volunteers. I'm like, I need to lead 5. You know how much work that is?
Yeah.
And so even that is like, I just think there's such a demand. What's funny is the church is trying to catch up in this area, right? Because you talked about
Sure.
the world's changing. Even the pastors are starting to go, oh, okay, this is important. But I don't think that leadership and pastors are understanding the demand and what is being asked, what it takes to run a successful creative space, whether it's
Yeah.
video,
Yeah.
worship, even
Yeah,
like
man.
leading all your volunteers
Yeah.
and musicians in work. Like, I don't think there's an understanding of what that takes and what the demand of that is. And then that speaks to to find someone who can do all of those things really well, what that costs.
Sure.
Most pastors aren't willing to pay.
Totally.
Or- and because they probably don't even understand the output and the benefit of what that
Right.
what that
will return.
impact has on your church.
Yeah, I mean, one of the easiest ways to illustrate that is at the end of the movie, sit through the credits and read off how many names there
Right.
are.
I tell people all the time, I'm
Come
like, you
on,
know why
bro.
this credit's so long? There's hundreds of people
Yeah.
that make a film that happen.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
now apply that to any context where you're trying to do that type of work, and
Yep.
so there has to be a realistic expectation.
Yes.
And so, a lot. It goes to the other side too of like, realistically, there's not going to be hundreds of people in most contexts. Some people are going to be blessed enough where they can do that. Sure. But you got to get creative of figuring out, okay, where can we. Where do we need to pay someone? Where does it make sense to volunteer? You could technically, in some capacities, have someone who's a volunteer who's over someone who's paid. You could get creative with that
Yeah.
based on just skill set of what you have of certain things this person can do. But like, it's maybe easier to find someone who could run a team in terms of like someone who could organize, schedule something. Like
Yeah.
that might be a skill set that you could more easily train than certain other ones.
Right.
So it's figuring out that structure.
And I think that goes back to, and this is a different conversation, but I think it's actually really prevalent. I think this is probably a whole podcast in and of itself. But it's like, it's setting expectations for what you can realistically achieve as a church.
Totally.
Yes.
And so I think what happens is you'll have creatives, whether it's from the worship side or the creative side, come into a space and have all these like dreams and expectations of this is what I want to try and achieve and do. And it's like, hey, that may not be what that church is a priority for that church.
Sure.
I'm blessed because I lead for I'm underneath a pastor where creativity, film, like artistic expression is important to him.
Yeah.
If I want to like try and pull off a film or documentary, I could pitch that to Jeff and he would be like, let's try and make it happen.
Yeah.
I've also been in contexts and spaces where I try and pitch to someone else and they're like, why?
Yeah.
And what I had to understand was like, that's just not a priority for you. It's not bad. They had different priorities. Maybe they wanted to, they're more into, again, leaders or, whatever the case might be. Evangelism, that was important to them. Okay, cool. So if you start with that mindset, and if you're clear about the communication we talked about, then either the people that you attract or just as you're leading people, you can be realistic about what it is in your church context of what you're looking for, what's realistic. Because sometimes there might be a scenario where you have someone who is really rad and really talented and you just go, I just don't know if this is the best space for you. Not that it's more of a pastoral thing, right? Yeah. It's like, hey, what you're really passionate about and what we're really passionate about don't line up. Yeah. I think there's a space for you to exercise what you're passionate about, and you should go there. Yeah. But the more that we try and conform people and like hold on to people that they're not in alignment, then what happens is creatives leave and they leave bitter. And that's been like, I think so much of what we've seen for so long is that people are leaving and leaving bitter. And then you almost see where the context where they came from. And you're like, yeah, I don't mean to be mean, but that was never going to work anyways. Yeah. Like it just, you know what I mean? Like that wasn't the spot for you.
And I think it also speaks to understanding from a pastoral place, what is the mandate that God has given you? I know a lot of pastors in the area and they're all very clear on like what they have personally been purposed for. Right. There's a pastor I'm thinking of who's like, I was made to build worshipers. Right. And so that's what their church does. Yeah. Like for example, our lead pastor, he's a leader of leaders. Right. And so everything in our staff values, everything about our church is, if you're here, you're leading people. And so it speaks to, as we make hires, as we do things, our organization is like, if that's not your bend, this probably isn't going to work for you, which allows for the rub to be a lot less as we begin to go along the journey of creativity. Because we're like, we know what the main thing is, right? We're still like, we're going to be creative. We're going to do all the cool things. That's good. But we're first going to build and lead people so that they can go do that. And so I think it's very important, again, that you have a relationship with your leader and your pastor, and you know that, so that you don't get to a place. And George, you kind of touched on it. Sometimes we can get frustrated because they're not doing the thing that we want them to do, and we are not recognizing they were never going to do that thing. And that's not their fault.
Right.
That's right.
They're doing what they're called to do. We have to be okay saying,
so from a very practical standpoint, I want to say this very carefully, but from a practical standpoint, I remember being in a spot of leadership where I just remember having a moment of clarity of it was like I was like, man, I'm butting my head up against this wall. And I remember just having a moment of clarity of like, oh, like they're never going to be what I'm chasing to be, and that's okay.
Totally.
And it was like almost such a freeing moment because I was like, oh yeah, I think it's just time for me to not work here. But I love you guys, and I'm not bitter and mad. But it was funny because I was like, I think if I didn't have that realization, I would have kept trying to change the organization, change the culture. Yes. And it was like, hey, my job isn't to change the culture there. Yeah. Like my job is to be in alignment and to help support the mission and vision of the church, of the local church there. And it got to a point where I was like, oh yeah, we're just not in alignment. And what they're doing and what God's calling them to do is great. There's so much fruit there. It just wasn't, again, where I was alignment for where I feel like God was calling me to be as in my ministry. And so I think like that's huge, is like, sometimes I think we look at again, I don't know if it's a prideful thing as creatives, but it's like, yeah, well, they're, you know what I mean? Like they're missing out, or they're doing It's like, no.
Can I speak to that a little bit? Like, we forget that the church is a body. And so, I don't know if you guys experienced this growing up, but usually when you're at a church, if you are going elsewhere
Yes.
to utilize your gift,
Yes.
there's issues.
For sure.
And I think
It's
one
frowned
thing I have really tried to do as a leader and really impress upon my leadership and lead up in that way is we allow for people to go out and experience other expressions of doing this.
That's so good.
Because I think sometimes we can get so caught up with what you were saying of like, man, I'm realizing I'm not really aligning with the house. And sometimes that means, all right, well, you're out.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, there's no place for you here.
Yeah.
When I think it's meant to be, sometimes your gifting isn't always meant to be used at that house.
Totally.
Right.
But you're still meant to be pastored there.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Because your value to the church is not just the fact that you can run a camera or play
Absolutely.
a guitar.
Absolutely.
Your value to the church is who you are as a man or a woman of God. And I think if we as a church were a little bit better about creating relationship with one another, and I think somebody had mentioned this earlier, like, hey, I know a place where you can go and this will this part of your life will be fulfilled,
Right.
and know you still have a home here.
Yes.
Like we talk a lot in church about God owning it all, but then when people don't necessarily align with our values, we're
Right.
like, well, we own you though. Like,
Yeah.
we don't want God to take you over there. And it's
Yeah.
like, I think sometimes as leaders we have to remind ourselves, do I trust God enough to bring in the right people if I am open-handed
That's right.
with the people that He's given me in this season?
That's so good.
And so, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I think too. What's interesting is someone just said this to me, and it kind of shifted the way I think. Is like, I want to say this carefully. I think there's waves that happen like within the organization or even just in the church, kind of like the church, like in America. I think are usually the waves are formed by leadership as a whole, right? And I think that what you just spoke to, like there was a large contingent of people where it was just seen as like these are my staff or my people, and leaving was like you're against us. But I feel like this next generation of young leaders that are coming into leadership and coming into their own platforms, a lot of them don't have that. I think probably because they were underneath a lot of that as well too. So I think it's going to be interesting to see over the next 5 to 10 years as some of the old guard is moving on and some of the new guard is coming in. I think there is so much more emphasis on that. Of like, go where God is calling you. We're not going to tear you down as you go.
Yeah.
We're happy that God is continuing to use you in vocational leadership. He's just at another house.
Yes.
And I think that is important for us to, like, as a solution, is to reinforce that, not have people. I remember, like, there is that context where you feel like, man, if I leave, what are they going?
You're like sneaking
You know
out
what
at
I mean?
night.
Yeah, you're like, oh
Yeah.
no, and it's like, man, that's so unhealthy. Like as
Yeah.
a global church, the global C church, like that's so unhealthy.
Yeah, you got to be able to wrestle because there's a lot of layers. I think there's different levels of where you may not fit in the overall house, and that's where you're speaking to of like, and being able to amicably figure that out and then support each other in your different houses. There's also there's actually a different room in the house of you don't work in this room, but you do work in this room. Let's
Right.
get you in the right room.
Right.
Totally.
And then there's I thought I could do this room, but no, I can do this room, even if it's not necessarily the thing that and so being able to differentiate those different aspects to it, to be able to function better as a body, and just being realistic. I think context, we've brought that up a few times, is huge. Of understanding the context of your situation, whether that be just being realistic about what the expectations are from both sides. Like I can think of how many times as a worship leader, because I think through that vein too, of you listen to a record, you give it to your musicians, and you're like, okay, electric guitar player, play this, and then not realizing there were 6 guitar parts on that record, and he comes back and he disappoints you.
Yep.
Of like.
Yep.
Those aspects of like expectation as we're attacking these different creative endeavors, like we've got to be mindful, we've got to be realistic, we've got to communicate, we've got to work together, and it's not that couldn't have been great in that one guitar player context. It's like, but he's not going to do it like the record.
Right.
And so that's where you talked earlier
Yeah.
about, like, I'm creating the best context for my house.
Yes.
So you got to figure out what that is for your house.
And what's going to allow them to win?
Absolutely.
We talked earlier about pastoring creatives, knowing them and knowing where their strengths are at and playing to their strengths. So I know every one of the musicians. I know every one of the vocalists that I have on my team. I know my production team. I know my creative team as a whole. I know what they're good at. And I want to create situations where they feel like they're winning.
Totally.
Right?
That's right.
And I think this is where we can speak to lead pastors even more. I think it's important that not only do you have a relationship with your creative ministry, but also you spend time trying to understand what you want them to accomplish. I don't need you to have all the jargon down. I don't need you to be able to like sit in my, my pre-production meeting and like understand everything we're saying, but at least do some of the homework on what this job entails.
Oh my goodness.
Like, what are you actually asking me to do? I think I've had a lot of conversations with my executive pastor about this.
That's good.
And I love him because he is always doing his best to try to figure out how to lead me better. And sometimes those conversations are hard. And I think he would agree with me in saying that. But I think some of the feedback I've given him is like, man, sometimes I feel like when you ask me to do things, you don't actually understand what you're asking.
Yeah.
Totally.
Like, maybe you guys have felt this before, but like from a worshiper's perspective, sometimes it just feels like people ask us to, hey, can you do this song last minute?
Yeah.
Can we? Sure.
Yeah.
But we also have a value of excellence.
Yeah.
And so I think at the place we're at now as a church, you can pretty much throw anything at us and we'll execute it pretty well. But I think we sometimes forget the preparation that goes into what made us sound good in the first place and what made us not be a distraction to people in the first place. Yeah. And when you are attentive to that and you're like, okay, I really feel like this song will fit at the end of my message.
That's good.
I'm going to speak to the lead pastors a little bit more. If you do some of the legwork on your end earlier and you know what you want to talk about and you know what you want to portray to your church on that Sunday, what God is trying to speak to his people, it allows us to be in alignment with you.
Totally.
If we're finding out about that on Saturday night, we can be in alignment. It's just not going to be in like lockstep like we want it to be.
Yeah.
And we're going to do our best because we want to serve you guys.
You'll bring them along. Yeah, you'll bring them along kicking and screaming.
Right.
They'll do it, but they're not really.
Right.
Particularly when you have volunteers in that
Yes.
context.
Yeah.
Of like, you're like, well, if we and obviously there's certain high caliber volunteers, or you're like, if we had more paid people, or even just a type of musician, like you can have really good musicians that need really good preparation. And so just understanding that, because there are certain contexts where that can work.
Yeah.
But it's knowing enough about your team and your context to make that call of like, is this ask too big?
And having the conversation with them. Like, even as I said that, my heart kind of skipped because I was like, man, I don't want my lead pastor to think I don't think he prepares. I know he does. I've sat with him. He's prepared messages like with me, for me. And so I think a lot of times it's having those conversations from a place of like, hey, I want to serve this vision better, and this is what can help me. Is that going to happen every single week? No, sometimes the Lord gives them a word on Saturday, and that's where, when the trust is built, right? When we spent time together doing the thing over and over again, and we've built trust in one another, we're like, you know what? We're going to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I think that's where that morale comes from and that momentum comes from, is like, okay, we've spent time in the foxhole together, and you've trusted me to shift a little bit of what you've done, just like I've trusted you to shift a little bit of what I've done. And then when that all comes to a head and we got to do it like in the moment, then there's so much trust built up that we're not worried about the outcome because we know how each other move and we know how they act. So
and I think that like gosh, you guys said so many good things, but I think one of the things that's really important too is like I like pastors will ask me for references for certain things. Hey, well, I'm looking for a creative guy, right? And do you know anyone? Yeah. But it's what you like. Again, like it's knowing what you want. Because my initial question always is like, okay, well, what are you looking for?
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. Because there is an element of, again, knowing what you're looking for when doing the legwork, and knowing who, what you're asking your team if they're already in place. Like, that's really important as a leader, because there's been so many times, as for me, I'll be in a room and someone will say something, and then I leave that room and I realize, everyone else just heard something totally different. You thought you said A, everyone heard B, C, D, E. And it's like, and so it's even then being able then to, from a leader perspective, know what you want, being able to communicate that. And again, like you say, it's not that you have to know every jargon. We're not asking you to become a filmmaker or become a musician and all the different stuff. But sometimes what I feel like a lot of times is happening with pastors and leaders is they're looking at some other church or some other example.
They're like, I want to do that.
I want to do that. And so many times I'm like, okay, but let me break down for you the time, the money, the experience, and the failures they had to go through to get there. Is that really what you want? Because if you want that, that's cool, but you can't shortcut that. You can't just manufacture that out of just a desire. Like, okay, well, a lot of that stuff, it takes time. Like good art, good creativity, music, it takes time. And if you're just going to try and microwave it or shortcut it, usually it takes a lot of money, and it's still usually not as good.
That common language is huge. I even think in both of the contexts that we're talking about here. So I think even from a director standpoint, you have to know a little bit of everything going on. You have to know how to talk to your lighting guys. You got to talk to your director of photography. Right. You've got to be able to coach the actors. You're working with the producers. If you're doing your job well, you have to have your stuff in line in a lot of different areas. From a worship leader's perspective, you have to know how to speak to your drummer, to your guitarist, to your bassist, to your keyboardist. There's all these little things that you don't necessarily have to be an expert in, but you have to know enough to communicate fully what you're trying to accomplish. And I guess I think we're all trying to say that if we could speak to pastors, if there was a little bit of effort put in to understand certain departments, a little of like, again, you don't need to get into the minutia of the weeds of that, but to understand maybe a little bit of process so that you can work better, understand timing, understand ideas and creativity, it just would go a long way. Right. And you make your creatives feel very seen and heard when it's considered how much effort is being put in.
That's good.
Yeah.
I think that alone, bro, like I could run through a brick wall for my pastor if he's like, if he knows he's asking me something that's going to be a heavy burden on my team, if he's like, hey man, I know this is going to be a big ask and I'm giving you the freedom to tell me yes or no, but here's what I need from you. He lays it out for me, and he goes, I know it's probably going to take like way more hours than we're used to. I know I'm asking a lot more of your volunteer, but even that, I'm like, I'd be like, you know what? Like, let me have that conversation with them, and I think we can do it. I think when that's missing, it just feels like there's not because you said this earlier, like I get paid. So like there's a paycheck coming into my bank account. There's some people who are showing up after their full-time job to come do this thing with us. And you taking them into account and it not just being me that's trying to fight for them is huge, man.
Absolutely.
Huge.
So I kind of want to, as we kind of approach the runway here, I want us to speak to people who maybe they've been in their context for a while and it's not been going well. They're feeling incredibly discouraged, whether they're from a creative perspective or even from a leader, but someone who's maybe they're on the verge of like, man, I just don't know how much longer I can do this. I've given up, or they're just in a very frustrated season, and or to people who have already left. And what we, from our context and from experience, maybe can speak to encourage them. Not to say we give a solution that solves everyone's issues, but what are best practices that we have seen from having been in those tough seasons or on the verge of leaving or whatever the case may be, to maybe just encourage those who are in that space or have already maybe even left that space.
I want to speak to the people who are no longer a part of the church. we still need you guys. I think the experience that you've had, one, as a leader in a church, I just want to apologize on the church's behalf. We want to lead you better. There are lead pastors and creative leaders who want to do right by you. And I think what would benefit you is having a place where you are known for more than just your gift.
Totally.
And I think maybe there are some of you out there who were crushing it at doing the thing, and you got burnt out because there was somebody who just didn't know your name. Right. You know what I mean? They knew the product that you put out, but they didn't know what you were walking through outside of spending time, making amazing content.
To that point, I want you to continue. One of the coolest things I've ever saw my pastor Jeff do, there was someone who came to our church. They'd been in the church and really talented at what they did. And they came in, you could tell they were kind of timid about like, oh, are you going to, and Jeff was like, hey, I want you to come for the next 3 to 5 months. And I don't want you to serve. Yeah. And you see their face being like, you don't want me to serve? And he was like, no. I want you just to be in church. So that might even be like a practical thing for pastors. Yes. I know there's so much where we need people and this, that, and the other, but sometimes it is a very helpful thing for you to almost disarm them by saying, hey, I'm not going to ask you. We're not going to ask you. I want you just to come be part of the church. Yeah. And not, your priority right now isn't serving. It's just to be loved on. And sometimes that like disarms so much and allows people to go, wow, I've never heard, like they're like, I've never been given that option to just come and not be asked to do anything.
Yeah. And I think there are people who have experienced needing to leave because they haven't been able to have the conversations with the right people. Like maybe you might have been barking up the wrong tree.
Totally.
And I think one thing that's helped me, I had a mentor of mine tell me, like, you need to write down what you think is the best plan of action, and then like literally go sit down in front of your lead pastor, your executive pastor, your leader, whoever it is, and just read it to him. Read your succinct thoughts, not just like what's coming to mind, because as creatives we could be emotional sometimes. So like we get on one subject and like tears start flowing. Like I've literally been in this place before, and so I think sometimes it's like knowing who to talk to, and then also as you enter back into the space, know that there is a need for you, but there's actually more of a want from a relational standpoint. I think creatives are just naturally meant to like, you literally can't do any of these things by yourself.
Totally.
You can't do it well.
That's right.
You can do it, but you won't go far.
Creativity is a team sport.
Yeah, man. And I think that the change we all want to see as creatives is only going to come when we all decide, okay, we're doing this together, and like what do we want to go, and taking our time to go after the pain points and chasing down the awkward. Yeah. Right? And so it's not going to be, I think we've had this conversation before, George, like I'm totally okay if I start a culture here, but I don't get to see like the end game of it all like come to fruition. That's right. And I think some of you guys who have been hurt by the church and left are like, if I don't see my vision to the end, then I failed. And it's like, sometimes you just need to like get the ball rolling. Absolutely. And you never know who's going to come alongside you. Yeah. You never know what God's going to call you to next. But if I could speak to anything, like there is a need and a want for you in the house so that you can help speak to the issues, and we as leaders will do our best to help equip you with the language and, get you in the right spaces to do that. Yeah. But God gave you those gifts for a reason.
So you're probably coming from a healthier context in this arena. Sure. Just from the aspect of, you talked earlier about one of your huge values is being your pastor's a leader of leaders. Yeah. Everybody's got to take that on at some point. Of like that, if that's not a core value, then we are going to continually disappoint people. Yes. And creatives are high on that list. And why I say that is these, like all these concepts of like good communication, pouring into people, they sound great. It is realistically not possible once you get to a certain size that you can take care of a certain amount of people. And so you have to start putting those correct systems and orgs and boundaries in place where you are making sure that there are people not falling through the cracks. And you can't do it all. And so it's like, that's a permission to pastors too, of like, it is unrealistic once you get to a certain size of like, your pastor is not going to be the direct person working with you most of the time.
Right.
He's going to be empowering another layer, another layer, another layer. And that is a biblically accurate picture. You can see that with Jesus himself. He's got the 12, but he had his inner sanctum of the 3. And then the 12, then the 70, then the crowd. You see the problems that in the Old Testament with Moses, where people came in like, hey, you're like not getting to everything, and we think we can help you. So we're going to set up a team that's going to take care of these outside problems. If it gets big enough to come to you, we'll come to you. So I think we got to make sure that relationships is everything. And so we got to make sure that we are meeting those needs and taking care of people.
That's so good. That's so good. I think too, just to kind of wrap it is like, man, just like we talk about, sin is like one issue, like it breeds in the darkness, but I also just think so many of these things of bitterness, depression, loneliness, I think that stuff is it just breeds in the darkness. And so I think having people that you can be honest and communicate with, and even outside of your four walls of the places you work, I'm so thankful that I have people who, again, I mean, I've worked with you for a long time, but even people who now are like, they're at different churches or in different spots that I can, and when I need to vent, or I have this, I have mentors in my life that I need to work this problem out. I think that stuff too is really important for your mental health and like how you can kind of like stay sane in some of those seasons. But also I think so too. Like any relationships you have, there's going to be rough seasons. So can you have spaces where you can vent, but then still have people hold you accountable and not allow it to become bitterness and root in your heart.
Absolutely.
I think that stuff is really important. And then people who are going to call you higher, who can in that season also go, yeah, man, you might need to check your heart on this. Right?
Totally.
Like, that is really important. I think it's something that we need to kind of instill in our lives as a healthy check and balance to what's going on, because it can be hard to maybe do that within your own organization, your own context. You're like, well, I'm talking to you about our boss. That's, you know what I mean? Like, it's weird, but then having people again who I think have a kingdom mind, and so even if they're not in your church context and know all the ins and outs of alignment, they're still going to hold you accountable to God's word and to what, again, as in a vocational sense, how you're supposed to interact with your leadership team. So I think that's also just huge, because there's no one size answer that fits all. But I do think out of abundance of many voices comes good advice and comes good accountability and people who hold you accountable and go, this is an event, it's okay, or no, we need to. This is how you can address this. And the advice that your mentor gave, right? Hey, write it down. Those are things that I think really are practical, in a sense, as people who know you, love you, hold you accountable, but also it's a safe place and can be honest.
I even think it's on us as leaders. Like, I'm blessed to be at a church with resource and a lot of really great volunteers and staff members. If you are not equipping the churches around you to do this better, you are failing those creatives. Right. You're creating more of the same problems. I think one of the things we love to do here, and our production director, Dylan, is like a savant at this. At every chance he gets, he is like at somebody else's house saying, hey, have you thought about this from a volunteer's perspective? Because they're looking at this board like a spaceship, but you're asking them to run your entire service, and then you're frustrated at why they can't. Like, they don't know what EQ is. This guy has like a full-time job as like an accountant, and you're expecting him to know the frequency spectrum. Like, I think that is where we, as churches who maybe have some of the systems and have some of those things down, we're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. We're growing, but I think when we do figure some things out that work for our teams, share that with those churches that are still on the come up and that are looking. There are so many local churches who could be a lot healthier if we weren't so insular
Oh, yes.
with our knowledge and with our wisdom. We were meant to do this with one another. And so send your team to help throughout the week when you have the time. As often as I can, I'm trying to go lead at other churches and encourage their worship pastors. Like, you could do this. And they're always asking questions. And like, I've only been doing this like as a pastor for a short amount of time. But the amount of things that God has shown me and the amount of wisdom that people have poured into me has allowed me to then go and return that favor to so many other churches. So, the more you could do that, the better.
Mm-hmm.
Let me the main camera died in the middle of that answer, so I'm gonna switch that, and then unless there's anything else you want to say, we can probably close it.
I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Everything else is rolling. Like your cameras are rolling.
I had an intense eye twitch at the end of my answer. You're gonna be like, oh my gosh, he's dying.
Was there anything else that you were going to add to that or no?
Oh no, I think we've
Cool.
beat the horse.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Don't use that phrase. Just use it.
Yeah, man, I completely agree. I think what you guys have both said is really important. And I just think, again, this is, I think, one for us. I think we're all very passionate about the local church,
Yeah.
creativity, but I think, again, the church is the people, right?
Yes.
And so I think, again, speak for all of us, but I think what's just been heartbreaking for us is seeing so many creatives leave the church. And I think for the church to be able to be the body that it's being called to be, we need creatives. We need creatives to be at their posts, ready, on guard, vigilant, doing what God has equipped them to do.
Yes.
I don't want there to continue to be this idea that to use your gift, your creative gift, you have to go out into the world to do it. I really am. I'm a big believer, and I know you guys are too, of like that God has equipped us as creatives with artistic gift for a reason. Some of it is to and to be in different spaces, but some of it is also to be in the local church and to be using that. Some from vocationally, some volunteer, some seasonally. But again, people leaving bitter, and leaving upset, and brokenhearted. I don't think that's not God's will and God's call for us. And so I'm excited that we're excited that we get to be part of the solution in that space.
Yeah.
And I just want to encourage everyone watching this video, again, whether you're in a space where you're like, man, everything's perfect and great, or maybe you're kind of going through some of these issues on your own, to seek counsel, to seek people in your space that can be in your corner. I think that's a big part of where we're here as well too. Like, find ways to reach us. Whether it be you could be Instagram or whatever, or even the comment section. We would love to just again be encouragement to you. And sometimes you can only do so much from afar, but I do think even that's a great place to start. Some of the most impactful people in my life started off as like cold DMs, and man, they were so encouraging in my life, and spoke to a call in my life, or just encouraged me. And then that then encouraged me to seek out then people locally to do that with as well too. But I think for us to be a resource for you in that space, it's an honor and a joy to do so. And so, man, we would love for you guys, even in the comment section, to talk about some of the whether it's structural or relational maybe issues that you guys have seen or faced in your own personal lives in this space, and what are other ways that you guys feel like we as a church, from a leadership wise, from a creative wise, can improve, because we believe it's important for creatives and the church to continue to thrive together. And there's a lot of fruit left that God wants to use to reach people, the gospel, lost people, and I believe He's going to use media and creativity to do it. Like, I really believe that. And so, ways that we can improve in that, ways that we can continue to have honest conversations and dialogue as pastors and leadership down to the creatives. What are ways that you guys have seen that? I think it's really important for us to have this conversation as a group. So,
can I say one more thing?
Hit it, bro.
I know we got to wrap, but I think what you were hitting on, George, is so important. I think for those creatives who are meant to be in not ministry vocation, but they're doing it for the industry.
That's right.
The church is meant to be a home for you.
That's right.
So like you can come back and get filled
Totally.
up so that you could be a light in those spaces.
That's a whole different episode.
Yeah, and so I don't want to get into the
No,
weeds of
it's
that
good.
now.
No,
but
100%.
But we were talking about
We gotta
earlier,
speak
like
to that,
what are
yeah.
the tangible things? I think your pastor giving someone space to just be like, I don't need anything from you. Just come and like be cared for.
Yeah.
And know that like as you go back out into the industry as a musician, as a filmmaker, as a graphic designer, whatever it may be, this can always be a place where you have people who are like checking in on you and who are contending for you and praying for you.
Yeah.
I think that's big on all of our hearts is creating a space like that. So if you're out there, get into a local church and be loved on. It's so important.
For sure. For sure. Well, man, thanks for watching. We're glad that you guys are along this journey with us. Man, we're going to be dropping some more stuff in the future. We're really excited about. This will probably be a theme that we maybe come through. It almost was like you could do its own series. And we didn't get to talk a ton about finances or resources. There's so many different areas.
We're going to get there.
It would be a 5-hour podcast if we try to hit all of it. So I think there'll be more around this, but if you're interested in that, again, let us know in the comments. Maybe some things that you would love for us to talk more about, maybe expand on. We would love to hear from you, and we'll definitely be reading those. And until next time, thanks for checking us out. Follow us on Instagram. I was going to say Facebook. Instagram, YouTube, our website. Should I tell them our website?
Go for it.
Is it Koa? Is it
Yeah.
City on the Hill?
Yeah.
It's Koa.
Koa.
It's Koa. COAH.live.
Yeah. No.
No.
Dot online.
Online. Koa.online.
It'll be in the description below.
Yeah. Follow us on there, and we'll see you next time, guys. Peace.
Have a good one.